So he evaded extradition a number of times. There were explicit orders. There was an extradition order that was signed by Missouri Governor Reynolds, and he gave that to Sheriffs Wilson and Reynolds with an express permission, an express letter to take their order to the governor of Illinois, who then signed off on an arrest and extradition warrant of Joseph Smith. So two governors of two different states signed an arrest and extradition warrant of Joseph Smith. Those sheriffs were able to apprehend Joseph Smith when he was en route, not en route, but when he was in a city that was away from his kingdom, Nauvoo, when his guard was down and he wasn't surrounded by his militia. So he gets arrested in Dixon, Illinois, and this is in 1843, I believe. He gets arrested in Dixon, Illinois, and the officers know immediately if they're in the state of Illinois, they're fucked, because the Danites, the Nauvoo Legion, they're going to catch up. And when they do, those sheriffs are not going to see the sun go down that day, right? So they try and take back roads. They try and evade the Nauvoo Legion. They try and evade the Danites for days to get him across the state line into Missouri. Because once they get to Missouri, they have a posse waiting there for them, and they have safe passage to Richmond, where they can actually prosecute Joseph Smith and hang him, which he deserved. When they were en route, Joseph Smith sent his personal scribe, William Clayton, to immediately deliver a message to his brother, Hiram Smith, who was still in Nauvoo, to call out the fucking troops. And they did. Those troops eventually, they spread out. They scattered throughout the entire state where they thought that they might be. And the troops found Joseph Smith's posse. They arrested the sheriffs that had arrested Joseph Smith and brought them into Nauvoo. These sheriffs knew that if the Nauvoo Legion caught them, they were fucked. So Joseph Smith that day, after he was able to bring those sheriffs in under the arrest of his multiple hundreds of men posse, what the hell are they going to do, right? What the fuck do you do when you're two sheriffs? You may have a piece of paper, two pieces of paper that are signed by two different governors, but what are those pieces of paper going to do against 200 armed horsemen? What the fuck are you going to do? So they were taken into custody into Nauvoo, and it was another 6 months before the entire proceeding, the entire thing was worked out in the court system. It was a goddamn nightmare, an absolute mess. But because Nauvoo was an absolute banana republic, Joseph Smith controlled everything. And after John C. Bennett was excommunicated, Joseph Smith was mayor. He was no longer vice mayor. He was mayor of Nauvoo. He was mayor, he was prophet, and he was lieutenant general of the Nauvoo Legion, the trifecta of theocratic power. When he was in Nauvoo, he was fucking bulletproof. So they didn't succeed. He was not extradited to Missouri, and he continued to live for another year almost after that initial arrest.
Wow.
And there are a number of examples of stuff similar to that. Him producing witnesses in order to get his cronies excused from polygamy accusations, or fining people $100 on the spot as mayor for abusing his character or unchristian-like conduct when they would say that he's a despot, a tyrant, a knave, a wretch, a scoundrel, a whoremaster. He would just fine people on the spot who said something bad about him in the street. He was a tyrant. He was an absolute tyrant of Nauvoo.
So a whoremaster?
Oh, whoremaster. He was running a sex ring, right?
Can you imagine? I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you just imagine somebody calling him a whoremaster, and then he walks off with his harem of, I guess, polygamous? Like, is that kind of like what happened, or?
Essentially, right? I mean,
I'm not a whore master. Come on, ladies.
Kick him in the nuts. How dare he say that about all of you, my wives? Yeah, look, I mean, his second in command, John Bennett, ran a brothel, and his younger brother, William Smith, ran a brothel in Nauvoo, right? Like, there was a consistent sex ring that was going on in Nauvoo. And Joseph Smith just happened to be the one who had the blessing from God that his harem was approved of, whereas the spiritual wifery that everybody else was doing was not approved of. It's a really complicated issue, but yeah, I mean, that's what was going on in Nauvoo.
Well, it's really weird because I know when that got brought up in my discussion with Kwaku, I mean, he was like, well, that wasn't actually doctrine, like polygamy.
Yeah, that's a lie. That's just a lie. Yeah. So there's a monogamy revelation and there's a polygamy revelation. The monogamy revelation was decanonized in 1876 when they canonized the polygamy revelation. The polygamy revelation, if you ever read through the Doctrine and Covenants, you're going to find it, D&C 132. It explicitly states that no person can get to the celestial kingdom without having more than one wife.
Oh, wow.
Explicitly. And it has the law of Sarah, which is so great, which is your first wife has to approve of every subsequent wife that you take. And if she doesn't approve of them, then she is given over to the buffetings of Satan and she is damned. That's the law of Sarah for you.
That seems unfortunate.
Well, it seems really convenient if you're the guy who's producing the revelation.
Well, yeah.
When Emma didn't like polygamy.
Yeah, didn't she? I know that was another thing I read was that she was actually secretly like she was secretly leading a campaign against the polygamy doctrine, right?
Fuck yeah. You know what? I'm gonna punt on that and say it's really complicated. Maybe we should talk polygamy at a different time, just because it is super duper complicated. Yeah.
Kwaku had mentioned a certain set of documents that apparently infected Mormon history, and a lot of the things people think are history are not history. I can't remember. It was some guy who fabricated history for the church or something like that. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah. So I was actually pretty frustrated when this came up because this is something that a lot of people will talk about in order to cast a specter of doubt on everything that the field of Mormon history academia has. So what he's talking about is a guy named Mark Hoffman. And I did 8.5 hours of podcast about Mark Hoffman to barely scratch the surface, right? It's a really complicated and fascinating story. The bare bones fact of it is the guy was a really good forger and he fooled a lot of people. We have discovered the vast majority of documents that he had his fingers in. The reason why he was so good at what he did and why he was able to gain credibility in the field of rare document collectors is he would mix in his forgeries with genuine documents. So he would sell to a collector basically a pile of documents, and 9 out of 10 of them were genuine, but there'd be one little poison pill. And he was really good at it. And what it did was cast a cloud of doubt over what we have. Can we really trust this document? When did this document come out? Who found this document? What's what's the pedigree of this document? Can you demonstrate the chain of possession for where the document came from to how you have it in your hands today? And the only response that I have to this really is Mark Hoffman fooled fucking everybody, including the prophet and multiple apostles. He sold them a fuckload of documents. He sold the church nearly $1 million worth of documents, many of them genuine, quite a lot of fakes, right? He had a lot of people fooled. But what really matters is He was discovered because the field of Mormon history academia is a science. It is a social science. I mean, don't take that lightly. It is not test tube science. It's not laboratory science. It's a social science, which understandably is a little bit more squishy. But the way that Mormon history academia works is you create models. You create models based on what you have evidence for, based on documents. When documents come forward, you try and fit those in to the models. You try and figure out, how does this fit in here? Does this document say that a person was where we know that they weren't? What is the writing style? What is the penmanship of this person? There are many critical tools that historians and scholars use to evaluate documents. And it doesn't take long of a person fabricating documents before their fabrications are discovered. And that is how Mark Hoffman was discovered. His primary fabrication that just didn't fit was the Salamander letter. It was endlessly examined. He started spreading rumors that he had it. Then he showed the transcript of it to a number of people. Then he actually produced the document itself. And enough scholars said, this doesn't read anything like Martin Harris. The handwriting looks very accurate, but the terminology doesn't sound like Martin Harris. So where did he get Salamander from? Where does that come from? So then we have to get into, where does the specific things, the specific words that we find in these forged documents, what is the pedigree of where those words came from? Where is the DNA, the proto-DNA of all of the constituent pieces of this forged document? Where do all those come from? And we discovered the Salamander letter had anachronisms, just like there are anachronisms throughout the Book of Mormon. It didn't fit within the historical narrative, and the person who wrote it never wrote anything like it before. It was an ahistorical document in the middle of a body of history, literature, and documents. And it stood out like a sore thumb. It took enough people, it took quite a few people a long time to understand that and to see it for the sore thumb that it was. But when you look back at it now and you compare Martin Harris's words to the words of the Salamander letter, it's very clear, it's very stark that it's a forgery. And by those similar methods, we have discovered the vast majority of Mark Hoffman's documents. And what it did do, in many ways, was strengthen the field of Mormon history. The bombs going off, it was salacious, the forged documents, the fraud. A lot of people talked about it. It was really interesting. But what it did was it made the entire field of Mormon history academia much more critical of their documents. Much stronger measures were put in place, and a lot stronger tools were more frequently utilized immediately in the aftermath of discovering those forgeries, which in turn, it was a tragedy. Multiple people died. Mark Hoffman committed crimes and murdered people. But at the end of the day, the good that came out of Mark Hoffman and his forgeries was overall strengthening the field of Mormon history. So people will dishonestly use Mark Hoffman as an example. He forged stuff, therefore we can't trust anything in Mormon history unless it's written by Joseph Smith or Willard Richards, or it's written by a Mormon history academic who's a believing member. We can only trust those sources. It's dishonest.